Let's get into it. It's a week like any other week, and yet it's a week with a few little twists. Good evening, primetime partiers. It's primetime party time. Welcome back once again to our hour of all things media and entertainment related, live on the air at 9 p.m. at ptptshow.com and on your time, wherever you stream podcasts. Tonight, we are going to fully take on requests about switching up our usual TV coverage and see what our listeners pitch for in terms of movies. And now, movies aren't completely different from television. They're very much like your eyebrows. They're cousins. So, we're going to see what kind of films our listeners really want us to talk about on the podcast. We'll start, some light conversations, and who knows, maybe it'll spark some new episodes that you'll see in the feed. Hey, Daniel, how you doing?
Hey, Tracy, I'm doing well tonight. How are you?
Good. Just another Monday.
I'm excited to talk about movies.
So excited.
As much as I love TV, movies are. I was like, how do I say this? Like, is TV like my first love and movies the true love? I don't think that's right. But
no, I think it's like cookies and ice cream. Like I need both.
Probably, yeah.
So it depends on my mood.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with that. Yeah, they're
As
both
people,
wonderful.
Yeah. We're both like 2 credits short of film degrees, so obviously we love movies.
Yeah, there's that. There's definitely that. All right. Well, then first, I guess we're up first, right? I'm looking at our toasts and roast, and they even seem to be movies related. What do you got for us this week?
Yes. And I'll just preface that my roast isn't too roasty. It is more particular, but for my toast. And what a surprise. I look at my toast and roast that I had planned, and they're both anime related. So welcome, guys. We're just about getting into July, month of anime. So we'll just start it just a little bit early. And my toast is to Demon Slayer, the Mugen Train movie, which I believe we can fact check the stats and edit it in if we need to, but listeners, also correct me if I'm wrong. It usurped Spirited Away as highest grossing anime film in theaters. And this is exactly when you just started to be allowed to go to theaters again. So it's pretty impressive. I was on the fence about seeing it in theaters or waiting to stream. And one of my coworkers loved it so much that he was like, I full on want to get a tattoo after seeing this movie. And I was like, there's no higher praise than I would like to take a still and have it permanently printed on my body. So I went and saw it, and it was extremely good. I think one of the main differences between this anime movie and many others is that, and continuity is so good in this. The last scene of the first season, last episode, it's a fresh show, so they only have one season out, but it's them getting on a train, and this movie picks up exactly with them. Maybe it captures the last 20 seconds of the last episode, them thinking about getting on the train, and it shows them picking exactly where they left off from that moment, and them getting on this train. And then it's kind of cool too if let's see. I think it's called. Yes. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Snowpiercer movie. I know they're making that into a TV series as well. And honestly, it's very good. Content is grotesque in some ways. It's only just showing the uglinesses of society. So, look in the mirror and say, oh, gross. But the other thing is that I only say this is familiar because this whole, and I'm making a guess, same could be same with Murder on the Orient, but it is a movie that fully takes place on a train, and which I think is kind of cool because you don't see that a lot outside of mean, Snowpiercer is one of them where it goes more sci-fi apocalyptic and views on, working class, etc. But you don't see that a lot outside of westerns and kind of older and like murder mystery for sure. But this is anime, so it's different. And yeah, it's also similar because there's these like demons that are kind of after the main character. And one of them is on this train and they're sent they're in this demon slayer corps where they're basically like, agents. And so they get like a mission to go help one of these kind of like high up demon slayers called the Hashira, um, help them with they've been having a bunch of casualties on this train. So in some ways, still murder mystery. So that's kind of the premise of it. It's extremely beautifully animated. It's really hard to describe this style because it's a bit different. A lot of it looks like almost like it's actual film, and then other parts of it look like comic strips. They do a good job of juxtaposing the different like old and new techniques for animation. So I think if you're just an animation nerd, it's a fun watch. Listener that you'll hear from later, Sean also watched this movie without seeing the series at all. And he said standalone, it was still a good movie and it made him want to actually watch the series and understand like how they got up to this point. Because there is a lot of intensity and drama, and the significance for, certain character plots is more when you've seen the series because you've kind of grown attached. It was an interesting way though of seeing like a series build up to a movie and how it could, you could just only watch the movie and it's a good movie and that's it. And then have like, if you've read the series, you're like, well, now I'm sucked in and this is an extension. And I'll be really interested to see how they pick up on their second season and if that really attention to detail continuity is like the second season picks up right after the movie so that they're kind of forcing you to watch the movie because a lot of animes the movies are really just for the fans like
yeah they
here's
don't
another
overlap.
storyline we kind of thought you would be into these characters doing another adventure together.
Yeah, it's like an inconsequential sort of romp with exactly, and it'll introduce some side characters and never really show up in the anime. And for the
Yeah.
hardcore fans, there's way more. This movie perplexes me.
Yeah.
Based on everything that you just said, I mean, it's just how well it's doing, like being tied to a series. There's just the fact that it's all a single location train, like that's absolutely wild. My mind's boggled over this, but it's amazing to hear that it's great, that it stands alone. Yeah, yeah, wow, yeah, that's
Yeah.
well worthy of a toast.
It it is a good toast. Very good toast. Very much recommend this to others. And also just fact checked myself, and according to Vanity Fair, is that Demon Slayer Mugen Train took the top spot at the domestic box office weekend of May 2nd, 2021, with 6.4 million, rising from silver middle spot of last week. And this was not just the biggest opening for Japanese animation, but for a foreign language film of any kind. What's more, of description of the film made it evident that audience came to already steeped in its lore as a series. Coming to the movie out of the blue, critics wrote, would ultimate be confusing. Interesting critics. My boyfriend seemed to disagree. But yeah, really interesting thing to see on that. And that's fun to know as a foreign film or foreign language film. I will say that I actually was able to see this movie in English dub. I want to say that that also seems to be like a triumph because I can't remember a time where I was able to see sub or dub in theater.
Yeah,
That's kind of a really big move. Like to see that growth in the anime. Now, my roast is not completely a roast and kind of similarly enough. So, the Sailor Moon Eternal movies. Now, it's a two-parter. And so, how this one goes is that there's this whole third season, or not third, it's technically fourth. It gets a little bit muddy because it's still in the Super S if you are, immersed in the Sailor Moon universe. But thus, it is really well done. I know it's already starting as not a roast, and I do really like it. I think the only thing I have to say that is a bit negative is like the Pegasus season, which is what this is, and it's season 4 if you're watching it on Hulu, is one of my favorites. It's one of the campiest comedic ones, even though the villain is quite dark, but it is hilarious. And the only thing I'll say about this movie adaptation and two-part movie is that in general, the Sailor Moon Crystal take on Sailor Moon is less of that. There's still a little bit of the comedy, but it's not the slapstick kind of like really like sassy and like roasty digs that you would see between the characters. They still have like some moments of being like embarrassed or doing something silly, but it's just not the same tone that if you're very attached to the original. Like I'm always more attached to the original. That being said, I wasn't a huge fan of Sailor Moon Crystal in general, and I did like these. They are, a little bit slow to start. I would not watch this like late at night or anything. Like you need to be like in the zone to pay attention to a movie, but they they do a really nice way of taking an entire season and, dissolving it into 2 hour and 30-minute long movies or hour 20. So that being said, that's kind of a toast to it. And the animation is really high quality. You are getting like these better, views of like I would say Sailor Moon is really well known for doing a lot of just like stills of Japan in the animated B-roll, specifically of like just like downtown Tokyo, particularly near the Tokyo Tower and such. So that is really nice to see. A lot of the voice actors seem to be very similarly paired to the original voices, and they do not do things in the same order that they are in this whole original season, but they kind of do a better job of mixing up and and I mean, obviously, it's kind of, fit for purpose that because they only have two movies, they kind of have to take out a lot of the fluff and introduce characters in a way that makes sense from the beginning. And I would say in the original series, you see people like, for instance, there are these three characters and they're from kind of like the villain side that are based on like they're like animals that are kind of turned into people with magic, and you never see that happen. You find that out retroactively, but in the movie they actually show these like, kind of superpower people doing this. So there's things like that where they actually kind of like give you context before jumping into things instead of like introducing characters but not knowing their backstory until later. So I feel like there's pros and cons to that as well, because I think like for this season there's a lot of enjoyable fluff that I loved that obviously cannot make it into when you're cutting it down to two movies. But the two movies did a really good job. Like I really enjoyed watching them. I'd watch them again. Um, I think there's just I would say, yeah, it's mainly the humor for me that's kind of the roast bit. Because even some of the jokes when the animation is more serious, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know if that joke lands as well in this iteration as it does for that. Or like there's like a certain thing where, it's almost like parent or not parent trap. It's almost like Freaky Friday. They have an episode where like the daughter, like Chibi Moon and Sailor Moon like switch places for a bit. And in like the older one, it's kind of more like funny and they get into these like awkward situations. But when it's like more serious animated, you're kind of like, oh, it's kind of like awkward and creepy. Like you don't take it the same way. Right. So there are some things where I'm like, no. But then I also look at this and how much content, and as someone who's consumed the seasons over and over again, I'm like, you did have to really pick and choose what you put into these, and they did a very good job editing and picking the right pieces to include. And if you'd never seen the original series before and watched these two movies instead of that season, you would be able to pick up on the next season. So that's a pretty good accomplishment, I would say, for this. So I know not the most roasting of roast.
Not at all.
It's really more of a double toast, but just like with some caveats there.
Right.
So I've I've ranted long enough about movies. Daniel, what are your toasts and roasts for this week?
In a change for us, I actually have the more roasty roast, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it.
Woo! Fire up.
Went to the theaters as well this weekend for the first time in well over probably a year and a half. And I gotta say, I'll start with the roast because
Okay.
I don't recall, and this could just be my memory, but
All right.
grabbing online tickets. Movie theaters now have the dreaded Ticketmaster concert convenience fee attached to them. A
What?
whopping $5 one, which is interesting to me based on the fact that you're selling me an electronic movie ticket.
I did not have this fee.
That's
So let me
great to
just tell you
hear.
that. But I did do Regal. I don't know if that makes a
Right.
difference.
So the thing is like fees are fees, right? And
True.
honestly, that would be a roast, but the actual roast is that you can waive the fee if you're a premium member of the theater. So you can
That's
sign up,
rude.
pay them money, and then not have to pay them this money. I was just like, my mind was boggled. I was like, oh wow, we're back. Like, all right, yeah, that's what being back's like. With that said, all worth it because the movie that I saw, and I got to see it with Primetime's own Just the Facts and BMAC, was F9. The Fast Saga is, I think, the official title
Nice.
of this one. Are you familiar with the Fast and Furious franchise?
Oh yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. All right. Are you watching this one?
I will eventually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then I'll try to keep this as light as possible. I'm a massive fan of this franchise. This is one of those, and we'll get into kind of how this can shape our conversation later in the episode too. But I've loved honestly almost every one and watched several of them a billion times. This
Oh
one I'll
yeah.
probably watch as many times. It was tons of fun
That's high
to go back
praise.
to, and it was interesting because it's high praise in this funny way, right? It's it's really funny because I also do believe that the story of the Fast and Furious like franchise is over and has been over for a couple of episodes now, like the
Oh.
logical endpoint, the happy ending, right? Like we've
Yeah.
seen these characters struggle and we've seen them prevail. And it's interesting because you get to a point in a long running story, whether it's a TV series or a movie franchise, where you have to start taking away the victories that you've given the characters and that we've like learned to really love about them. You have to start kind of like tragically taking those away from them in order to keep
Yeah.
the story going, in order to raise the stakes. And so it's really tough with something that where you see all of these characters you love come together because the Fast and Furious franchise starts out. I don't even know how to put it. It starts out in like several different directions. I guess I would say like the sequel doesn't like follow the first movie as directly as many movie franchises do, and the
Hmm.
third one ends up chronologically being like number 7 in the timeline. So it's not really until number
Oh
4
yeah.
that you actually get a full-fledged sequel to the first movie of the franchise. It's really, really interesting in that way. And then 5 and 6 are prequels to number 3, and then you get 7, and then you get 8, and now you get 9. It's interesting in that way because yeah, as we've seen it, we've seen the series kind of like come to a confluence, and
Yeah.
we've seen those characters all get together and have a couple crazy adventures and really win. And like I said, now you have to start raising the stakes. Now you have to start taking things away. Now we go to the theaters and we're almost dreading it because we're like, oh no, like what awful thing has to happen in order to like kickstart a story here?
Yeah.
This movie actually does a pretty good job of like keeping all of the characters' motivations necessary for how to like get into the plot of the movie, and what the conflict's going to be. It worked way better than I thought it would based on the marketing. I will say the marketing for Fast 9 didn't do much for me, but the movie itself has. And I thought a lot of things really worked about it. There's a lot of sequences that work. There's a couple risks they take. it's an interesting movie because it really cares and it really respects these characters, and it's very cognizant of the story that it's told, and at the same time, it's also like, for all of that to work in this way and for us to give you kind of like what you want out of this franchise, we have to cut a couple corners, and you have to be okay with that. And either at this point you love these people and you're on board, or you don't, and we don't care if you ever will. And so on that respect, it's like, if you go into this and you've only seen like the first movie or none of the movies, I don't know if I'd recommend. I don't know if I could say like this is a good like blockbuster movie. But if you're this far invested, we've said it on this show before. It's about the characters, and this movie does that right. This franchise is really, really lucky to have Justin Lin back. And we got a comment in the chat. MJ says, "R.I.P. Paul Walker." Absolutely,
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And but F9, the Fast Saga, or Fast and Furious 9, or however you'd like to call it. One of the best things about that franchise is there's no naming conventions within any of the sequels.
No, not great consistency in the headlines, in the title sequences. It's a bit jumping around the place, I think, probably based on who was involved and who was doing all of that. Because I would say, like, after you off the air recommended a viewing order, I'm now really interested in doing that before seeing this one, since I feel like it's been a while since I've seen a lot of these. So that's some homework.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really fun. The one of the great things about this movie is that a lot of characters who have never in this franchise gotten to interact with each other finally get the chance to. Like people from the first movie, people from some of the sequels that have never been on screen together, some of the main characters of the franchise that haven't had full conversations together. It's just really great, and it works. It works so much better than it probably should.
Did they do the Avengers approach in a way?
The Avengers, I can tell you the first sequence is very endgamey, but what are you speaking to?
To having like these related movies, but there's not always crossover between all the characters, and then having like the Mario Party of the movie where it's like everyone's together now. Or is it in a different way?
I would argue that, interestingly enough, Fast 5 is like the Avengers of the Fast and Furious franchise.
Okay.
Interesting, like from what I can tell, I didn't really get into the series until around the time that Fast 5 came out, and I was really only familiar with number 2. And the second and third movies aren't massively successful sequels to the first movie. The first movie it's a great movie, and it did have a ton of commercial success. I don't think the same can be said for 2 and 3 on that level. So when they kind of rebooted with 4 and then they built up to 5 was kind of like that Avengers kind of, let's bring in the 3 crowd, the 4 crowd, and the 2 crowd and do a big team up movie. And this is kind of, I guess, the first time since then that that's happened. And it happens to a really fun extent. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe this is like the Avengers 2 of the Fast. I don't know.
I only say that because it's main reference point. Because other thing that we noticed at the theaters, and we also compared notes and got completely different previews. We did see completely different movies, so that's fair enough. But one of the previews I had showed it was a really long Marvel preview of just, and they showed, and they would do it in that style where they just flashed kind of the, movie poster to be, released, and it was just every Marvel movie that's coming out between 2021 and 2023. And let me tell you guys, there's a lot of products are about to be released. A lot of things are coming off the assembly line. And I'd say I'm interested in some. There's some that I'm quite like, I do have to see that one. And then there are ones where I'm like, I do not need to see that. And, they're doing fine. So me saying that is totally fine. So they will recover. So yeah, there's a lot of that going around. So I feel like that's why I had it on the brain. But that being said, I got into Fast through Tokyo Drift. So
great movie to get into it through.
you
That's
know,
absolutely one of
late
the
to the
top
party
ones.
for sure.
Or technically early if you would have ever thought that around the time Tokyo Drift came out.
I guess that's true. So already, we got a lot to say about films. So without further ado, we'll take a little break and then we'll get into what our listeners have to say. We will pass the mic for a little bit.
So we had, our listeners have been asking us kind of to speak to movies or like, since we speak to so much TV, like how, if movies fall within the realm of what we speak about. Now, I guess what we can do, like you said, is like, let's pass the mic, because we do have one listener in particular who puts it in this great way of how to think of movies in comparison to television.
Movies, I feel like, at least a series, every movie is kind of almost like just a long episode of a TV show. You know what I mean? It's just interesting to see how they evolve too over time. And those take years to make, several movies, just to see things evolve and how they change things from even books. There's so much there to explore.
That was Mary. You can also hear her in episode 22, the Party versus SpongeBob SquarePants. But yeah, she has some interesting ideas about movies being like long TV shows. What do you think, Tracy?
She makes a very good point that once we've headed past and gotten into the golden age of television, I don't think people would make that same comment in the kind of routine sitcom television shows. While I have a soft spot for them in my heart, that is not the kind of show that you would say that's like, a shorter version of a movie, or, a movie is an extension of that. But if you look at all of the extremely premium television that we consume nowadays, and a lot of them are hitting the movie time periods. Like, some of these shows are 59 minutes long per episode, and some even longer. And so you do get to that point where some people are creating a season of television that is much more like a saga of movies. So I think that's a great way of putting it, especially in our modern streaming experience, that movies and TVs start to get a bit closer together.
Yeah, I agree. They are starting to get a lot closer together. They're starting to like take, or not even starting. This is kind of like been long happening, but they take a lot from each other, right? Like,
yeah,
I find it interesting on the production, and it's kind of like Mary said, like, the movies take years to create, and when you get a TV show, like, you shoot a pilot and it gets sold, and then you have a schedule and you do an episode for 2 weeks and an episode for 2 weeks, and and then you're off, and then it's very much like a different sort of scheduling as far as like how to build it. But at the same time, it's not as much anymore. It's like you said, the lines are getting blurred with like how like limited series, or even we spoke in the last episode like about 24, and while that's like there are several stories that can only be done through like a television medium, and 24 is one of them. Like, what that actor we talked about, Xander Berkeley, said about his role is that, this show's like exploring a character in a way that TV doesn't usually, and we're getting into the nuances of that, and TV's been taking that from movies, and movies have been taking that, like, how do you keep sort of like a long-standing, or how do you keep an audience engaged over time and continue this story forever and ever and ever, right? Like, to your point, like Marvel movies have been described as like TV translated back over to movies, in a way. In each what, like, movie is an episode, and I don't know what the seasons would be, but et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and then they do it in reverse when we look at shows that we've covered, like WandaVision, and blanking on it, but Jessica Jones.
Right.
It's like, these are also ones where it's like they'll go from movie to, they'll have characters that switch platforms. And in WandaVision, it's quite in a literal sense, but you can see that being like they're treating the mediums based on we have a specific story. Where does it fit best versus like I'm making a TV show and I'm making a movie. They're really making the story lead the production in a way I don't think we've seen a ton. It's definitely something that's been building, but I think we're seeing a lot of that more now than we had previously.
Yeah.
Maybe it's also like because some people are being able to get certain deals. And so you are having a lot of creators that have control, even though we also know from, hearing other things that, that's everyone's still at work. So there's still issues to be had. It's not a magical universe where you get to just be like, I make it all, bippity boppity, Netflix stream it. So still much T's and I's to cross. But at the same time, yeah, like, and there's these series like Big Little Lies, which almost feel like a movie, and they're based on a book. I think a lot of this, if you're looking at kind of I think it's Hello Sunshine, like the Reese Witherspoon kind of production company, where it's like they publish books and then they, produce them into films. Like you're seeing this like different kind of streamlined production, and then some of them become TV shows, and you're looking at the source material first and then going like, this is the best way to put it out there. So yeah, I think a lot of it is based on how it's made, and we're seeing really cinematic TV. And then we're also seeing movies that also have to make meet the big expectations. And yet, like you're saying, they're taking notes from TV of like, well, we can't wait too long. We're going to lose this audience. Or they have to have the audience on such a hook where they're like, like Star Wars fans, where they're like, I'll wait 7 years. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I'll be camped outside the theater. Yeah. So there's like, you got to have it those ways. I mean, we grew up in a hometown tangent where a big, it's gotten a little bit more built up, but it was pretty rural when we were younger. And one of the biggest social things to do was camp outside for hours on movie premiere days.
Yeah, I did that a couple of times. Since we are on this subject, actually, one of the movie series that we're going to talk about, I actually did that for when I was talking to Mary, and she was kind of describing these sort of like movies that sort of feel like TV series. She did speak to a bunch of sort of saga films and book adaptations, right? Like this is a lot of what we've grown up with. Stuff like, Harry Potter, she mentioned Lord of the Rings, Twilight. I had to stop her on Twilight because it's interesting. Twilight is that's something, but it's interesting in a way where it's like, well, how is that memorable? Like, absolutely, that was a book, and then there were movies, and when I think of it, it even kind of feels like TV, and that might just be like the whole vampire overlap. But yeah, let's hear our thoughts on that movie series in particular.
I think Twilight's just memorable from those series because they just had a big fan base, and there was a huge. We were around the same age as the characters when they came out. They were going through high school. We were going through high school. I don't want to be cliche, but I have to be cliche that I loved the books, hated the movies, and I think it's not so much for the typical reason that people like the books better. It's not so much like what was omitted or added from the books, what people usually like, why they like the books better. I think it's just how it was visually laid out, honestly. I think the first time I watched it, I couldn't get through it all. Like, I just thought it was so silly. As I've gotten older, too, just thinking about Twilight, just like when it comes up, there's too many holes I can poke in the story that I find are weird. Like things I thought were like so like entertaining or romantic or whatever when I was younger. Edward, I get he's 17 forever, but he's been 17 for like 100 years, and Bella is just freshly 17. Like he's falling in love with this like high schooler. Like as I've gotten older, I'm like, that is so weird, just why in the world? Because if you think about the reasons why people, or even like teenage girls, anyway, even adults, like why you would be Team Edward or Team Jacob, like none of the reasons you could list are really like make any sense. They're weird reasons.
What are the reasons?
Well, I don't know. Like, what? I don't know, Daniel. Like, what? What are the reasons? Like, people are like, oh, Team Edward. Like, he's a vampire, but he's like, he has this cool smolder going on, but he's like cold to the touch. Like, why is anybody interested in that? You know, like, he glitters in the sunshine.
I love her take.
Yes.
Because it's true. The way those movies play out, the way that the conflict sort of plays out, or the whole like what is that? Is that like a will they won't they love triangle? For speaking in our vocabulary.
You know, yes and no. Like you kind of I feel like, I mean, when you watch them as more of an adult, you're like, you do think there's clearly the smart choice and the romantic choice. And you're making the romantic choice that most people, if they were, 10 years older, would just go, bananas. You're not doing that. You're doing this. And in that sense, I'm saying if she was like 25, she'd go like, yeah, I'm gonna date Jacob and not Edward. I'm not gonna go through this like, oh, I have to like, take a risk on becoming a vampire and might become a freaking murderer. I was lucky that I was just like blessed to not be that way, like 99.9% of all the other young vampires. And then it's like, oh no, I also could have just been like with the werewolf dude, he'll just like be eternally like, my protector, super toasty. And I mean, literally, he's supposed to be like run real high temperature and just like, bop around Washington in a pack. It's like, seems pretty cool.
None of this makes sense.
That being said, like, I do love vampire shows and movies. So at the same time, like the colon storylines are very cool. That's just more of the like going into the mindset. I love rewatching these movies, and there are like I do remember a fun fact that was, I think, and also, feel free to fact check me in the chat, guys. That the first film was supposed to go straight to DVD, but then the books like just went crazy and they're like, no, we have to release this in theaters, which is why it seems kind of low budget.
Oh,
and then the rest of them, like you can tell each movie they got more and more budget because the special effects just start getting much better.
I was gonna say, so yeah. When we describe Twilight, and I don't know if it's just because there are some similarities within my mind to a couple other vampire shows we might have mentioned on this show in the past. When I went, speaking of sitting in line for a hometown theater showing, I showed up to the midnight premiere of Twilight Eclipse. I want to say that's the third one. Enjoyed it as a movie. Obviously, I don't remember too much. But yeah, I never really thought of it as like the low budget. But now that like you're saying the first one kind of had that to it, I am sort of seeing that. Yeah, totally. And
the first one is quite good for low budget. Yeah, I will say that. I think like when you watch it, thinking like it's weird. Like I think even people who don't think about movies that much would go to the first one with how popular the books go, and like right now you have this expectation of what Harry Potter is as a film quality standard, and you would see it and go like, well, that's odd. They have such a large fan base, but it's because that the books were out for a bit before they got popular. So then it's just like they're picking up and going like, switching things around. That being said, probably great ROI. But they then like I went to the New Moon premiere. I even have like photos of it in an album on Facebook that was like New Moon premiere. And it's like that one was kind of big because I think that was that's where you meet the werewolves versus the vampires. Typical, pairing up. We have that in True Blood. Pretty much every show, it's like, okay, we're gonna have like the cold-blooded, the hot-blooded, go head to head. And yeah, the Twilight vampires are a little different because they have this whole like vegetarian vampire thing going on where they just like do the animals and not the people. Like True Blood does the like synthesized blood instead. Like each franchise will do its own take. I do, yeah. And then it's not like Dracula or What We Do in the Shadows, which is more like a like a farce on all of that, or the I forget Dark Shadows, which also is a bit of a spoof. So you can see all these different iterations. And that being said, I just talked about multiple things that went across different platforms. So True Blood feels a lot like film. It's on HBO. It is very premium. And they run about 45, 50 minutes an episode. And they're based on books. Cinematic quality, you have that. And then you have things like Twilight, where they were all movie based. And then they did the same thing as the last Harry Potter film, where they split the last book into 2 separate movies. But that being said, I would say like the first 3-ish movies, I like those more a bit, but as they get to the end, but that also is me being very partial to not loving how she chose to end the last book. I mostly, she, like, in a lot of the kind of intros to these books, she'll note like Shakespeare as a huge inspiration, and then in the last book, like, not everyone dies, almost no one dies, and you're like, listen, I've read a lot of Shakespeare. Usually everybody dead.
Well, everybody died in Eclipse. That's what I remember. Just the fact says there was some big battle. That there was definitely a
big battle in Eclipse. Yes.
So there's not a big battle later. I'm wondering if like
Eclipse is good because she's getting like hunted by this woman who's scorned because they killed her like lover / partner. And she's like, well, I will like to take my revenge. And she's like straight up stalking. She's like trying to just, take out Bella. And yeah, that one you're actually feeling like the heat, the paranoia, like it's coming. And then it doesn't. And it makes sense because she's the main character. But then in the last ones, it's like they're supposed to have this giant battle with the Volturi, which is like their weird take on like the kind of like, they're supposed to be like also in Vatican City, but not like the Catholic Church at all. Quite the opposite. And then they're supposed to, but also be this like ruling like vampire government. And then instead of like duking it out, it's like they kind of duke it out, but then they kind of like cease fire like a bit early. And I was just like really hoping they were just gonna like come to just like, Harry Potter had to do it where it's like, oh my gosh, they killed off one of the Weasleys, and you're just like, my heart is breaking.
Yeah.
And then it's like they kill off Dobby, and you're like, did I shed a tear? Of course I did. And then in this one, you're just like, these people, they just all are just chill, and like the experimental daughter is like, oh yeah, she just like grows up to be an adult within 2 days.
Wait, right? Is this the?
And then she ends up with the ex-boyfriend. So not weird.
This is what Just the Facts must be referring to. Instead, spoiler alert for Twilight.
Spoiler alert for the Twilight franchise.
Fourth, I don't even know. She got a magic baby immediately after graduation. She should have just gone to college. She should have just gone to college is honestly what I was saying about Gabriella for most of High School Musical 3, but that's a whole different story.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
With that said,
3 more.
She
puts off going to college, and it is. Yeah, I think there are a lot of things where I'd be like, the 25 version of herself would be like
off going to college. What book does she graduate? Wait, what?
She graduates, lies to her family, and says like, I'm gonna go to college because she's becoming a vampire.
Oh no!
She said she's going in Alaska.
This series has such strong opinions from its audience. What?
Yeah.
Oh, she goes to Alaska too.
In the books, Edward says like, no, like you should actually go to college, and then I'll turn you into a vampire and do all this stuff. And she's like, no.
So
I want to just like get married, become a vampire, and like do that. And you're just like, go to school.
Wait,
get a degree. You might make different decisions based on having more choices in education.
my favorite teen movie thing ever is just yelling at them to go to school and like forget these high school like problems that they have. It's like, please just go to school. Don't yeah.
It's like, you might not stay with your boyfriend if you went to school. You might not change your entire essence of your being if you maybe took some time.
Yeah, no, that's what I love about the whole the end of again going back to High School Musical 3. It's hilarious to me how like her and Troy stay together. And they play it off like she's down at Stanford and he's up at Berkeley, and it's like, wait, these are high school kids. Like Stanford and Berkeley, like they're not on the same side of the bay. That is a long distance relationship. That is about as far as the BART goes.
3+ hour drive. I like that you mentioned this because also, spoiler alert, for the To All the Boys I Loved Before franchise, they do end with, I mean, she ends up picking a school in New York. I believe it's NYU, but at first she doesn't get into Stanford, but she gets into Berkeley, and the boyfriend has like a lacrosse scholarship to Stanford. It's like, oh, but Stanford and Berkeley, we can hang out every weekend. I was like, you're doing that drive every weekend? That's what we call denial.
Yeah, no, seriously.
You're gonna not do any of your social plans or make any friends in college because you're gone every weekend when people do stuff. Yeah, like that's what's not happening.
That's why when you get 3 of your 4 years through college, you're just watching these movies like, no, don't just go to school. Just go to school.
Don't do that. Don't make choices based on what your situation is right now, because that's all changing. It's all changing. And though I guess for her was not changing other than going on her honeymoon and then later becoming a vampy. So that's what she did.
So she becomes a vampire.
Yeah.
And then she has the magic baby.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that baby, Just the Fact says, there's no vampire sex ed because who thought that was going to happen? So they're not expecting her daughter to just like grow up and be chill with them?
No. So the reason their whole thing was that it was supposed to be that when she became, it was supposed to be that like basically that vampires like shot blanks. So that was like the whole
How much time in the story is dedicated to this.
You also think about this and go like, maybe too much attention to particular details in this book. But yeah, so they apparently, were like, oh, it's cool. And then she was like, this is not cool. And she starts acting like real pregnant real fast. And then they're like, yeah, it's because you are. And like they go on their honeymoon and she kind of gets like immediately pregnant, and like this old lady who'd seen like this happen like one other time in like some sort of legend is like, no. And that's how they figure it out. It's very strange. Yeah, it's this particular storyline, like I like the series as a whole, but that one I was just like, no. I kind of feel like every other vampire franchise is like you make the sacrifices when you're transformed. I don't like this like, oh, no, you get to have your cake and eat it. And that's kind of how I felt like about the ending too. I was like, no, like there should be some losses here. Like you can't just be able to be like rogue and do whatever you want, because that is kind of what the family does. Like they have this overseeing vampire organization and they like
Edward's
follow
family.
their rules, and they are like, oh yeah, no, we're just gonna like do what we want and get some people to back us up, and why would they think that's a threat? And it's like, yeah, they tend to do feel this way. And True Blood does a little bit more of like a actual governmental board of vampires. So they have like area leaders, like sheriffs, and there's like a hierarchy, and it's very much more like mimicking regular society in this kind of like specific set of people until they're kind of also in regular society as well, or at least human society. And yeah, that's like how those characters have to follow rules, or else there are like heavy consequences. So I think that's also why, like, when I consumed both of these around the similar times, actually, I was like, this is hard to believe. Oh so there is something about watching all the vampire shows that you'll start to be like, I don't know about that, because in this show this happens. When I watch Vampire Diaries, if Stefan does not wear that ring, bad stuff happened. Like there's just stuff like, the whole fact that they're able to go in the sunshine to me is also deal breaker in the Twilight Saga.
Oh, is that when they get glittery, as Mary says?
Yeah, that's where
They're
they
just
get
glitter.
glittery and sparkly. Like that's their whole thing of like, oh, we can't go into the sunshine because we sparkle. And I'm like,
I love
nah.
this. Wait,
I
so
like the other vampire universes where you go into the sunshine, you burn alive.
yeah, no, yeah, there's stakes, no pun intended to it. With wait, so and I'm sorry if you said this and I just like
Oh
haven't
no,
been able to process everything yet, but
that's
just the
fine.
facts of saying that then Jacob dates the daughter, you think it couldn't get
Yes.
more extreme, but then it does. Wait, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. When does the daughter be like? Is Eclipse really the like action climax of this series?
So yeah, basically. I mean, there's a little bit of action in Breaking Dawn, but not nearly
Awesome.
enough. Like the Breaking Dawn should have been like Kill Bill. And
Breaking
it was
Dawn, Breaking.
could
That's
not
number two.
be more opposite. That's my hot take. But like I really just felt like you should have just like and True Blood has like a super heart-wrenching like death in it where the main character straight up has to kill her first love interest throughout the whole series because he comes infected with this really bad like vampire blood disease and is going to go basically kind of like have rabies type thing. And like, these are huge sacrifices and they can't just like kill off a few characters. It's like, nah. But also, yes. So Renesmee, the daughter,
Remember
she
the
grows
name.
up and there's supposed to be this thing where like the werewolves imprint on the people. And yeah, he does
nice.
that with this girl and you're like, ew, this is a little bit like Mrs. Robinson, but reverse. And
I
that's kind of gross.
I
That's how I felt about that.
I still have this one question. Just the fact is, when a book gets really popular, I think the author gets a lot of say, then editing goes out the window and whatever they want goes. I cannot follow the structure of this story as you're all describing it. Like, it sounds
Mm.
like the last two movies are resolution. And it's
Yes.
just all this baby thing drawn out.
The baby part could
Like,
have just not been there, and they probably would have had more space to dedicate to the greater storyline. I know that's me being like, I am going to super hate on this because it's like my biggest distaste in the whole series is that to me it just felt like a little forced even when you're reading the book like you're like really this is what's happening here and then you're like but what about all the other stuff going on like there's supposed to be these vampire leaders who are like illegally making a bunch of baby vampires into a baby vampire army to go fight the Cullens like and it's supposed to be this kind of like anarchy corruption all this stuff like and I'm like living for it I'm like yes let's see it let's do it and then we have this storyline that's supposed to be really sappy and then it's supposed to be they all like meet the daughter and go like look isn't she just like this amazing blessing and doesn't it just change your mind about most of that stuff you're like what is this an allegory I didn't sign up for that.
So okay, I this is okay. So MJ says at least Jacob and Renesmee will always be closer in age than Bella and Edward. Now this is something interesting that
True.
Mary, talked about that is something that seems to come up a lot in the vampire sort of backdrop is
Oh yeah.
the age difference, and I noticed it in Angel and Buffy, obviously. Though by the time you
Obviously.
get to Angel, the David Boreanaz at least looks 30, so he kind of fits up in the offices. But it is funny because he's supposed to physically be 18 still or so.
And he physically is. If you look at those abs, you could real sick on them.
All right. So you don't have any problems with this 100-year age gap and these teenage vampires? Like, what is there a counter
people
argument?
really look the other way on those because all of them have this thing.
Right.
I mean, at least with True Blood, the main character Suki is like an adult. She's like supposed to be in her like early to mid 20s, and so she's like, and she's had like a really hard life. So I think you, as an adult, you watch True Blood, and like there are certain times where she's like, I am fed up with all of you vampires. You are all kicked out of my house. Like, I'm done. And it's very relatable because you're like, this is a lot. And these other ones, like with Twilight, she just like keeps on taking all of the baggage. It's all far too much for a 17-year-old and at times younger. And you're just like, really? There's no point where you're just like, I might need to think about some of this. take a step back. No, she's just like full in from the beginning. And I think it's supposed to be sort of a romanticized view of things and like the teenage infatuations and all of that, though with very large consequences, you know. But yeah, it is yeah. All of it. Just the Twilight movies are great. I like so much of them, and I also think they really bring you back into like an indie time period. There's really great soundtracks on all of them, I will say. I might have some critiques to say about the final few movies, but all of the curated soundtracks are fabulous. It's pretty much every top indie alt artist did songs for that. Some of them wrote songs specifically that were to be released when these movies went out, and usually they were part of their regular album anyway. Like you can think about Meet Me on the Equinox by Death Cab for Cutie, which I believe is on the Eclipse soundtrack. There's, Band of Skulls, Florence the Machine, lots of top artists of that time making tracks for these films. And so regardless of if you liked the movies, you would like the music, I would say. But I do love these movies, even though I pick apart at how, intense they go, how they, should. I definitely have my take on like, if I was in the editor's room, I would be like, no. But I could not imagine the audience backlash if they did not stay true to the books on the final few. Like if they were like, you're not going to put Renesmee in the movies. And I'd be like, as they should not have in the books. But like I could just see people going like, how could they not put this in the movies? This is a huge thing. So, they were really doing well by the fans on that, and maybe not thinking about them as standalone movies and more like movie adaptations.
Yeah,
which I think has changed a little bit on the book adaptations now. Right. I feel like they do think more about like, well, this has to be on TV or on film, and we're going to have to cut some stuff, or the way the information is introduced is going to have to be different.
Yeah. Something interesting that a series that I watched earlier this year, The Expanse television show, is based on a number of books, and they actually introduce one of the major characters from the second book onward in the pilot episode and lengthen her story to build up more over time. And I thought that was really fun. But yeah, to Mary's point, like she did say that the Twilight movies adapt everything for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And also now I see why Twilight is listed in these memorable movie series along with Harry Potter and all of the others.
Oh yeah. Like on lists of movie series that I have to annually watch, I do have to annually watch the Twilight Saga. So that being said, like I have a lot of things to say on like how I would have done it. No one's asking. But at the same time, like I also like them enough. I usually, though, when I get to the last ones, I'm like, do I want to watch this? Do I want to see how this ends? Because they're not as much my favorite. And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. Other times I just make it through like 4 of them. And then I'm like, okay.
4 out of 5.
Or 3. Usually the 3 out of 5 is my go-tos. And then I decide if I want to do 4 and 5. But usually once you've done the 3, you're like, I got to just like push through. Like I'm on the last few miles of like 5K. Just be like, gotta just kick. Gotta sprint through, get through 4 and 5. And there are things to like about the last ones too. Like the part 1 is more like the wedding and all this other stuff. And then the part 2 definitely gets more into the baby storyline, which I think everyone's just like a little off because it does feel like even though, Bella and Jacob did not do anything to like produce children either, it feels a little incesty. It just like It's a little bit like, oh, and yeah, it's off-putting.
That's nice.
I'm not sure why.
No, it sounds off-putting. It's interesting. It sounds hard to buy. Maybe is the better way to put that. It sounds.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. A quick question.
Sure.
That was a talk.
I know we really went on to our Twilight, just
which is
convo,
which is great.
It took life.
we have more to say and from more people. Technically, we have 2 more movie segments left at the least. Do you want to power through them, do another break, or do we want to do a sequel episode to this one? Like, what's everybody feeling? What's everybody got time for, essentially?
I know. I know. Does everyone have time for us to go through a couple more, or should we just, really realize that people want us to do movies?
Yeah, right. We could do movies part 2
and do a part 2er. How are you feeling?
How am I could run through a few more, though we did get some requests that I am not up to speed on just yet. I'm down to go over them and see if the chat has anything to say about them in particular. I am also down to maybe do some more research. I'm down
Let's do some more research and do a part 2, because I think we've had a really enjoyable conversation about movies and how we should start covering them. And I think, the other recordings we got were pretty much requests for episodes that could all live on their own. So let's give them the time they deserve.
Fantastic. While it's still fresh in your mind, though, let's talk about the last one on our list. Since it was requested a couple weeks ago by Fen. We're talking Mitchell's versus the Machines. You finally got to see that. What's up?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed this. Mitchell's versus the Machine is, we're taking the summary from IMDb, and this is a movie from 2021, and the whole synopsis is an animated action comedy about an ordinary family who find themselves in the middle of their biggest family challenge yet, saving the world from the robot apocalypse. No big deal, right? It all starts when creative outsider Katie Mitchell is accepted into the film school of her dreams and is eager to leave home and find her people when her nature-loving dad insists on having the whole family drive her to school and bond during one totally not awkward or forced road trip. But just when the trip can't get any worse, the family suddenly finds itself in the middle of the robot uprising. Everything from smartphones to Roombas to evil Furbies are employed to capture every human on the planet. Now it's up to the Mitchells, including upbeat mom Linda, quirky little brother Aaron, and their squishy pug Monchi, and 2 friendly but simple-minded robots to save humanity. I liked that this movie combines like 3 concepts that weirdly work. That sort of National Lampoon style family road trip structure, and then the kind of like technology versus people iRobot type situation,
of course,
and then also a lot of like, with smartphones and Rubas and evil Furbies, you're getting this kind of like quirky, on the nose, but also product placement, sort of sarcastic jokes written in there, which doesn't surprise me when you see people like Abby Jacobson and Maya Rudolph and Conan O'Brien like on some of the cast involved. So yeah, it's really enjoyable. I think this is one of the better, like, this was made for Netflix, correct?
Was it? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I think it's a nice competition too for a lot of the Disney Plus movies that I feel like have been released of Pixar during the pandemic and otherwise, that are kind of these like must-see movies. And it seems like Netflix is getting their way of making, similar sort of animation in that DreamWorks, Pixar-y type realm. It'll be interesting to see how that grows, or if it does. I also saw, and I mean to watch this, like another movie in that somewhat style, like The Wishing Dragon recently got on there. And I mostly know that because I follow Jimmy Yang on Instagram. And he shared that was going on. It's like, oh, I didn't hear about that. Because, a lot of Netflix is like, you only see what they kind of predict you wanting to see. So if you're not watching enough, like, kind of like children's animation movies, they won't necessarily come up on your list. Unless you're me, then they definitely will. So yeah, like that's kind of like my big picture point of view on this movie. Daniel, what do you have to say about like more the details on Mitchell's vs. Machines?
So their Sony Pictures Animation is amazing to me, and a lot of the reason a lot of their films from like the last decade or so are amazing are because of Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. And as I was watching this, I was like, this is almost a Lord and Miller movie. Like this just, it has that feeling to it that you saw with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Lego Movie,
Yes.
Spider-Verse, who I think one of them wrote. Lo and behold, it's produced by them, and it's directed by Mike Rianda, who's known for his work on Gravity Falls, which I'm not familiar with, but I know that some
Nor
people
am
in the
I.
primetime community are really, really into. With that said, it had that sort of stamp to it, and I love that. There's just something in their language of themes and story, and I think that there's like so much truth to sort of what they draw up their stories to be about. And I'm always looking forward to anything their name's attached on. So as I was watching it, I was just kind of like, it's just like such a distinguishable stamp, right?
Yeah.
Not and it, yeah, I absolutely loved that. I loved the characters. Um, I loved everything about like the little, like obviously the film school, going off and escaping and the making movies about the conflicts within the family. I don't know. There's just so much there. There's like the great climactic moment where everybody in the family gets their due. The Furby scene in the mall is hilarious. Made me kind of stop and be like, wait, what is going on? Like, well, this is. With that said, something honestly, another thing. And I can't speak to whether that I would assume that this has something to do with like a probable suggestion by the Lord Millers. They have the best credit sequences in movies, in my opinion. I don't know if you've ever seen the Jump Street movies. It's kind of
Yes.
like unbeatable. With that said, I thought it was really beautiful, the credit sequence to this one. And it shows pictures, like live action pictures of not only the cast but a lot of the above the line crew. Like with their families and whatnot. I found that to be like
That's
such a
nice.
beautiful thing to put in the credits,
Yeah,
and,
it's
and
very
tie the movie up together.
heartwarming.
It was a very heartwarming movie, yes. And I really enjoyed that. That was nice. There are just movies that I think get it, and I think that this one was one of those.
That is one of the best things one of us could say about movies. It's like,
actually true.
there are some movies that just get it.
Yeah.
Because we do poke holes in a lot of movies, even though we love them.
Absolutely.
And I'd say like this is one where we don't have a lot. We don't have a lot to pick at. So
No.
yeah, and it's interesting because when I was looking, I was like, this does remind me of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and it is cool to know like, oh yeah, there's like a reason.
yeah. No, there's a definite reason. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I will say like the robot the robot uprising kind of apocalypse thing is a tried and true plot at this point perhaps, but Olivia Colman was a really fun villain for it. So
Yeah, I do think that is true. I feel like this is a good one to be like, so guys, we've done the robots. We've done them. And
yeah.
I mean, I also love Wall-E, which is a similar like, robots and humanity in the decline, and it's less the iRobot or, robot uprising type issues, and it's more like the how technology and humans interact. So and they did a different kind of, since it's very silent, like I think
Right.
that's like it's nice as well, but I agree with you. We are reaching a cap on some of those things. I feel similarly about a lot of books that I used to read as a teenager. I got to a limit of dystopian societies where I was like,
Right.
I can't do, like when Hunger Games came out, this is a take that not many people had. I straight up was like, can't read them. I've done so many of these.
Wow.
Already. I've done so many universes, so many dystopians novels, and I'm like, I can't. I'm at my cap. I'll watch maybe the movies.
I only watched the second Hunger Games movie. I forget what it was, Catching Fire. And I was really into a rewatch of Lost at the time, and I just drew parallels left and right. And so I actually, I don't, I like didn't allow the story to stand on its own. I have no idea what the, really like much about what the movies are.
Yeah, that's an assignment for us as well.
Yeah.
I remember a college professor telling me that the Hunger Games books were written to be adapted to film. Like an author was like, "Hey, you gotta write some books that we can turn into movies," and that's how they got on that one. You know, don't know the source for that.
Right.
UCI professors, but it seems pretty accurate. So and that is one where they do some heart-wrenching cutoffs. So bringing it back to my Twilight, squabble is that, yeah, you gotta take out some characters. You gotta stab everyone in the side a little bit. That's more my I
Is
guess
that your
that's more
version
my
of Kill Your
writing
Darlings?
appreciation. It's like they can't all just win in the end. That's not how it works.
That's
I
that.
do think
Okay,
in
okay, okay.
general though, like it is hard since those books are made for teenagers and ones that have like more like these romantic-y, daydreamies, it is hard watching that as more of a hardened adult. So I think that is when you're going back in time to a different kind of place of mind and universe that you're supposed to be in, mythological and teenager. Both are arguably hard to get back into. That it's you are looking at it differently, like and being that person on the couch watching it saying, "Go to school." we've got we've grown. So,
Yeah, hopefully they have too.
what are you gonna do? But yeah, these are all great films, and if anything, this episode has really taught us. And thank you, our listeners. And we have even more footage to share with you guys, and more films to discuss. And now we know
Yeah,
we gotta put some movies into the mix.
we absolutely do. While we're here, I did take a quick poll for favorite movies.
Oh,
And so I
nice.
guess we can just shout those out with the crew that we have tonight. Uh, I mean, we've talked about ours before. I believe probably
Yeah.
on an after show. But I mean, I'll shout out Surfs Up. I'll shout out Heat. BMAX says his favorite recent movie would be Knives Out.
Oh, that's a
Uh,
great one.
yeah. MJ says favorite recent movie might be Enola Holmes. Um,
Oh,
and I think that's like a sequel's in production, right?
yeah.
Fen likes Promare, which is an anime movie that I have never heard of, don't know
Yeah.
anything about. What's yours?
I know a lot of times I will list favorite directors instead of movies, but I will just shout out a few. From Ghibli, Howl's Moving Castle is my favorite. Um, I do love Kung Fu Hustle in the Stephen Chow area. I love Blazing Saddles when it gets to Mel Brooks. That one definitely doesn't always age the test of time, but you guys just gotta know Mel Brooks. And then I also really like Mr. Nice Guy, which is a Jackie Chan movie,
Nice.
where he's like a Food Network star. it's, it's combining two of my loves. But yeah, I would say like those are always in my rotation. But then I also really like Pretty Woman and like Sweet Home Alabama. And those are less like I don't know. Those are more rom-commy, but they are very heartwarming and like Legally Blonde. Those make my list. I have things that are very like more edgy and like for a while I would always watch like in high school Kill Bill was like my favorite movie of all time. So I really bounce around on the favorite movies. I just listed like 8 and you asked for 1.
No, I could
So,
list eight easily too, but yeah, it's like we've said, it's somewhat directors and it's somewhat moods and it's somewhat there's a lot to it. We also asked Mary, so this is a little bit
oh
on
yeah.
her favorite movie.
I think this often changes. I'll have a favorite movie, and then for the same reason, I won't get a tattoo. I'll think something's like really cool, super funny, and then I think about it. I'm like, oh, thank God I didn't get that because my taste has changed. I mean, I might still mention like, She's the Man with Amanda Bynes. That kind of humor. It's so stupid. It's funny kind of humor. But honestly, I don't know. I would have to say Harry Potter, though, is something I religiously go back to them. And I think it's just they honestly captured the atmosphere that the books describe the movies just do that so well, if not better than I could have ever imagined. The visuals, I mean, just every detail, like Diagon Alley, just like going through the Hogwarts halls, just what you imagine as a kid. Like, I don't think you could really capture everything, even reading the books. Just like, who didn't watch Harry Potter when we were younger and just wait for their Hogwarts letter? You know what I mean? That's the only one that's been unwavered throughout my lifetime.
It's a good pick. Good pick.
Great pick. Also, She's the Man is great. I love all Amanda Bynes movies. They're fabulous. And for this exact reason she said, there's a lot of stupid humor, but at the same time, I'd also say like she had a specific type of movie that was produced where it was like a teen movie, but it always had some sort of like bigger, they did a good job of lightening like heavier topics. So yeah, like, She's the Man is about her being like, oh, they canceled the girls soccer team, so I'll just be on the guys soccer team, and being like, these people never heard of Title IX. But yeah, I think she went to private school, but the semantics don't matter. It's a funny concept, funny movie. We all know how to treat nosebleeds. So yeah, it's great. And yeah, Harry Potter, could not agree more. It creates a whole world that we all saw on the pages on the screen, which I do think the one thing we have to say a lot about both TVs and movie wise is content that's based on books. That's the main thing that really has come through as like these cinematic adaptations, is the things that go from the page to the screen.
Well said. There is so much more to talk on about movies, and actually, we already have our next assignments on the matter. We'll be talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, There Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men in the future, and whatever else you want. This show could not have been made without the following amazing people. We're talking our artwork was done by Fen. You can find her at FenLante on Instagram. Our theme song was done by Jay Wright. Find him at jwrightmusic.com, our website. And thanks to Coco, our production manager is BMAC. And we guest starred Mary tonight from all the way in Ohio. If you have any movies for us to talk about, if you have any TV concepts for us to talk about, if you just want to rant, roast, or rave with us, really about anything, you can hit us up by sending us an email at info@ptptshow.com via our voicemail or chat box on the ptptshow.com homepage, and catch the next time primetime party time next Monday live at 9 p.m. Pacific here on ptptshow.com. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's a wrap.
That's it?
Yeah.
Ah, well, good timing then.
He's the vampire and they're going off and they're like up on that hill or whatever in the woods. He's like, I've killed people before. And she's like, it doesn't matter. And he's like, I've never wanted to kill someone so much before. And she's like, I trust you. Girl, why? You don't even know him. What?